All right, so the Eagles have a few reasons to be cautious about the Kansas City Chiefs, but honestly, there's no greater reason than Patrick Mahomes. This guy is not just lethal in the playoffs, but when you see how well he plays, especially with a couple factors in play for the Super Bowl, you'll understand why the Eagles should be worried, even if they don't want to admit it. I've got to dive into that, plus some updates on a former Chiefs coach now back in the NFL, some key players to keep an eye on with the injury reports and more. But first, how about that? First things first, it's officially Super Bowl week. Both teams landed yesterday, and of course, the Pro Bowl games were happening for the teams that aren't in the Super Bowl. The NFC came out on top for the third year in a row, but let's be real. I don't know anyone's really paying attention to the Pro Bowl anymore. I mean, it's kind of become a bit of a joke. Don't get me wrong. It's great for the players, especially financially and for their resumes. But playing dodgeball instead of an actual game, yeah, that sums it up. I get why it's not the same, but I'm just glad the Chiefs haven't had to worry about it in years. But before we get into the details, hit the subscribe button, like this video, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for your support. Anyway, before we get into Super Bowl content, I have to mention something interesting. Former Chiefs offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy is back in the NFL, but not in the way I expect. He was coaching at UCLA last year, but now he's taken on a surprising role. Running backs coach with the Chicago Bears. Yep. You heard that right? After his one-year stint with the Washington Commanders, where things didn't go well, they finished 4-13 with one of the worst offenses in the league. He moved back to the college ranks for a year at UCLA. And now, after all the chatter from Chiefs fans about bringing him back, he's officially off the table. The Bears grabbed him, and honestly, I think it's a solid move for them. With the Bears GM being Ryan Poles, a former Chiefs front office guy, there's definitely a connection there. Now, shifting gears back to the Super Bowl. There's a lot to talk about, especially injuries. On Friday, an injury report came out for the Eagles, and while we still have some time before game day, there are a few players to watch. 4 Eagles players are listed as questionable. 3 of them have their 21-day window to return from IR open, including tight end C.J. Amma, defensive end Brandon Graham, and wide receiver Britton Covey. The one that stands out the most to me is Brandon Graham. He tore his triceps in late November, but there's a chance he could return, even if it's just in a limited role. If he does come back, it could be a huge boost for their defensive line. Kenneth Gainwell, the running back, also made the list after suffering a concussion in the NFC Championship. But the good news is, with the extra week, he has time to clear concussion protocol. He had a solid season, so if he's ready, he could definitely make an impact. Moving to the offensive line, the Eagles are dealing with some injury concerns as well. Center Cam Jurgens and guard Landon Dickerson both struggled with injuries last week. Jurgens didn't practice, and Dickerson ended up leaving the NFC Championship game with knee issues. So it's worth monitoring how they recover leading up to the game. Chris Jones, Turk Wharton, and some of the other Chiefs defensive players will need to take advantage of any weakness in that interior line. But the most interesting injury on the Eagles report is their first team All-Pro linebacker, Zach Bond. He was full go for practice earlier in the week, but then on Friday, he showed up with a groin injury. We don't know how bad it is, but he didn't practice with the rest of the team. If that injury flares up and limits his mobility, that could be a big loss for the Eagles. We all know how crucial Bond is to their defense, so this is definitely something to keep an eye on. All right, with all that said, let's dive into more Super Bowl content and break down how Patrick Mahomes is playing like a man possessed, especially in domes where Super Bowl 59 will be held. But before I get into that, have you ever Googled yourself or a loved one and been shocked by how much personal info is out there? Well, I've got a story for you. A few years ago, my friends over at All, Chiefed Up sent me a pizza to congratulate me on hitting 20,000 subs during a live stream. It was super thoughtful, but here's the thing. I never gave them my address. How did they get it? I found out my address was out there online, publicly available. That's where today's sponsor, Aura, comes in. They help you protect your personal info by removing it from data brokers and people search sites that sell your info to identity thieves, scammers, and more. Aura is your all-in-one protection against identity theft, scams, and online threats. From data broker, opt-out to identity theft protection, a VPN, antivirus, password manager, and more, Aura has got you covered at an affordable price. If you want to protect yourself and your family, go to ra.kc to try it out for 2 weeks free. Link is in the description. Now, back to the Chiefs. During the Pro Bowl games yesterday, the Chiefs were escorted to the airport by KC police, and it was cool to see the community rally behind the team. It's hard to believe they're going to their 3rd Super Bowl in a row. 7 straight conference championship appearances. Unreal. Dynasty stuff we can't take for granted. Speaking of the Chiefs, let's talk about their injury report. Honestly, compared to the Eagles, the Chiefs are looking really healthy. The Eagles have 15 players listed, while the Chiefs only have 5. That includes safety Brian Cook with a quad issue, QB Patrick Mahomes with his ankle, right tackle Jawan Taylor with a knee issue, quarterback Jalen Watson with an ankle, and wide receiver Sky Moore with an abdomen injury. But here's the thing. Those first 4 guys, they were all full participants in practice all week. They're playing for sure. Now, Sky Moore, his 21-day window to return from IR opened up last week, and there were questions about why that happened. Well, when that window opens, it means he can practice, but it doesn't necessarily mean he's coming back to the roster. According to Matt Derrick of Chiefs Digest, him being listed as doubtful means they're likely not bringing him back this week, but he's still a solid scout team element. So, no, don't expect a Sky Moore touchdown in this Super Bowl, folks. Sorry to burst that bubble. Now, let's shift gears and talk about Patrick Mahomes in dome stadiums. This stat is mind-blowing. Mahomes is undefeated in domes 12-0. Yeah, he did lose to the Colts in 2022 in their stadium, but get this, the retractable roof was open, so it doesn't count in my book. Let's dive into these stats because they get even crazier. Over those 12 games, he's got a 66.40 completion rate, a passer rating of 103.7, more than 3,600 passing yards, 26 touchdowns, and only 4 interceptions. That's an average of 304 yards per game, 2.16 touchdowns, and just 0.33 interceptions. On top of that, he's rushing for nearly 6 yards per carry with 49 attempts for 283 yards. It's wild. And if you look at Mahomes in his 4 Super Bowl appearances, his rushing numbers are even more impressive. In the playoffs in general, he's averaging 7 rushing touchdowns and gets a first down almost 40 of the time when he scrambles. We saw it last week in the AFC Championship. Mahomes is capable of using his legs when he needs to. So yeah, I'm expecting a huge performance from him in this Super Bowl. I know some of you might be thinking, well, the Eagles have the best defense right now, number 1 in passing and scoring. But here's the thing. Mahomes has faced top defenses before. In fact, he's 3-0 in the playoffs against number 1 passing defenses. Let me break it down for you. Brady is 2-1, Manning is 1-1-1, and even legends like Steve Young and Lynn Dawson are 1-1. So it's safe to say Mahomes doesn't get rattled by a tough defense. And if you look at Mahomes' stats against number 1 passing defenses, he's averaging 37 points per game, 70.8 completion, 2.7 passing touchdowns per game, and a 108.5 passer rate. That ranks first among all quarterbacks with 2 or more playoff starts against a number 1 passing defense since 1950. It's honestly insane. There's a lot on the line here. Jalen Hurts has a shot at becoming the first quarterback to lose his first Super Bowl and then make it back and win one. If the Eagles win, he'd be the first to do that since John Elway. Meanwhile, Andy Reid has the second most playoff wins as a head coach with 27, just 4 behind Bill Belichick. If the Chiefs win, Reid would be just 3 behind Bill, and he'd be tied with Joe Gibbs and Bill Walsh with 3 Super Bowl wins. But if Reid can win a 4th, he'll be tied with Chuck Noll, which is pretty incredible. Speaking of Super Bowls, if Mahomes helps his team secure a 3rd win, that'll help cement his place in the GOAT conversation. A 4th Super Bowl win, which he could do before the age of 30, would tie him with Joe Montana and Terry Bradshaw for 2nd most all time. And don't forget about Travis Kelce. He's just 3 receptions away from setting the record for most catches in Super Bowl history. Then there's Steve Spagnuolo, the Chiefs defensive coordinator. If the Chiefs win, he'll grab his 5th Super Bowl ring, which is already a historic accomplishment for a coordinator who's won a Super Bowl with 2 different franchises. Now let's talk about Roger Goodell, who had some interesting responses at his Super Bowl press conference. He was asked about the public perception that the refs favor the Chiefs, and of course he laughed it off. Seriously, the whole idea that the refs are somehow rigging games for the Chiefs is laughable. I mean, have you seen the IQ of some people out there in 2025? Some believe the moon is a Russian satellite and others think the earth is flat. So yeah, apparently the refs are favoring the Chiefs, even though every metric shows that's not true. He was also asked about quarterbacks flopping, especially after Mahomes had that one questionable flop in the SEC Championship. Mahomes is literally the only quarterback being criticized for this, even though Josh Allen has been doing it weekly since he came into the NFL. Goodell responded that flopping isn't really an issue, but they'll keep an eye on it moving forward. It's funny how anything the Chiefs do gets put under a microscope. But with all that being said, what do you think? Let me know your thoughts on Goodell's responses and whether you think Mahomes has an advantage playing in a dome or going up against top defenses in the playoffs. Is there really an edge for Mahomes here, or is it all hype? Drop your thoughts below. And until next time, thanks for watching.